like everything else we do, kind of like figure out what the winning outcome looks like, figure out what are the steps it takes to get there, execute that with precision and speed, and really help the client succeed the best we can.
Welcome to the Student Housing Insight Podcast, where we are putting you in touch with the people who bring student housing to life. I'm your host, Wesley Dees. I'm also the CEO of Student Housing Insight. SHI is a platform for off-campus student housing professionals to network, learn, and share ideas and data. For more information, check out studenthousinginsight.com. So are you a developer in the student housing space, or maybe someone considering a value add renovation? If so, then this episode is for you. This is a Behind the Biz episode featuring dflick, who is one of the principals at BSB Design, which is an architectural firm that has been active in the student housing space for at least 3 decades, maybe. In some form or fashion. I've worked with them on at least 4 student housing development projects since becoming a consultant in 2017, and probably another half dozen before then in some kind of form or fashion. It's been a great experience every time. And so what made it a great experience? Have you ever heard of that saying, begin with the end in mind? Now, I think any architect is going to ask, a developer, hey, what's your vision for the project? But BSB takes it a step further to ask their client, what do you want the design process to be like? Now, you may be that developer that is, asked that question and you don't even know how to answer that because your history has been, as far as with finding an architect, find one that can, work in whatever state or locale the project is in. And you're just focused on getting that project through the approval process. And if that firm gets you through the approval process, you reward them with the project. And I completely get that approach. But have you asked yourself if that process is short-sighted and what happens down the road, once the heavy equipment rolls in? So Don he'll take you through that process and what that's about in detail. But what else has made working with BSB such a great experience for myself? I've got to tell you, it's their people. They love what they do. They're passionate about getting things right for their clients. It's kind of like choosing between KFC or Chick-fil-A. Both will sell you fried chicken tenders, but which one is most likely to do it with a smile on their face and a sincere effort to make sure your order is correct. That's BSB Design. So with that being said, let's get to my interview with dflick. Don, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Wes.
Well, it's great to actually have someone in studio. That is a rare thing for me because when we started this podcast, it was in, 2018-ish, 2017, 2017. And so at that time, I was in a co-working spot that had a podcast studio, which was nice. And I had several folks that, were in town, including BSB, that, were able to come in and actually sit down and have a discussion, a face-to-face discussion, and it was nice. And so, but yeah, between BSB and Pet Screening and South Park Interiors and several other folks that are involved in the student housing industry, they were all right here in Charlotte. So it was fantastic. But after COVID, there was plus I moved down to Rock Hill, and my office and studio are all in the same room, and just haven't really had an opportunity to have folks in the studio. So it's nice to actually have somebody face-to-face sitting across the table from me today.
Well, I wish everybody could enjoy these nice digs.
Yeah, well, I'm fortunate. I was able to move in here in June of 2020, so right at the height of everything. And going back to that co-op place that I was working at, so many of the parents in the neighborhoods, where I live were realizing, okay, their kids aren't going back to school and they're not going back to the office. And so they were like, okay, well, I've got to go somewhere to have a phone call. Well, that somewhere ended up being the co-working spot, and most of it was happening in the podcast studio. And so it was one of those things where I just, I was full-time recording like 2 webinars a week, and I had to find something else, and was very fortunate. This place came open and there was nobody looking for office space, obviously. So they made me a really nice deal, which I'm just waiting to get that notice of, hey, your rent's going up.
Hopefully you signed a 99-year lease.
I wish. But you guys have got a new great spot in Charlotte. You guys moved to fairly recently. Not the same spot you guys started out when I was originally introduced to you guys. How's that working out for you?
It's working out well. During COVID, we were looking at all this empty space we were leasing and decided to go to a hybrid strategy. And so we downsized the office, but we upsized our view of Uptown, and we've got a roof terrace and everything. So it's a nice, comfortable place to work every day. Yeah.
It's nice. Well, hey, dflick from BSB Design, which is an architecture firm that is doing a lot of work in student housing. I'll give that a little bit of an intro. Why don't you give kind of a 30 to 90 second elevator pitch to our audience here?
Sure. So BSB Design is located all over the country. We've got 12 offices around the country. Centralized, the main office is in Des Moines, Iowa, where the company started. Mm-hmm. We focus on all types of design for living. We work at how the built environment is adapted to how people live in different housing sectors, and do everything from single family housing, which we started with back in 1966, to townhouses and garden apartments, to podiums and deck wraps, and even high rises.
Yeah. Okay. So how did all of that intersect with student housing?
As you may know, Todd Meckley was leading with a partner, Entasis Design, and he got into student housing. BSB Design was looking to acquire and expand their multifamily footprint. Yeah. And Todd's partner was looking to retire, so they acquired Entasis, and Todd became a partner with the company and, led the student housing effort. Yeah,
Todd was doing a lot of student housing. And so I'm assuming the student housing team is still kind of that Charlotte team, or is there, or some of the other locations doing a lot of student housing as well?
We have the biggest student housing team in Charlotte still, but we collaborate with people in other offices as well. Chicago in particular has done some student housing, and Sacramento, I believe.
Well, tell me, I've seen a lot of design in student housing, everything from cottages to the mini houses to the high rises. Is there anything that's a favorite of yours that you really kind of cling to, and not necessarily maybe the easiest, but hey, this is one that we really like doing?
Well, I think, my favorite is whatever somebody's ready to do next. We're architects, and we need to, work with whatever the client's wanting to do and help them succeed with that.
Right.
We all enjoy a nice puzzle and a challenge, and those higher density projects like, deck wraps and podiums and high rises are certainly a bigger challenge, but, you can also do great things with gardens and build for rent and cottages, as you said.
Yeah. It used to be all garden, and you could do it a mile away from campus. Just had to find the right piece of land. But some of the stuff I see today, it's just incredible. And I've worked with you guys on a couple of things. We'll get a little bit into that later, but yeah, the stuff that you guys are doing on some of these infill sites, it's really amazing. It's like, how are they going to put 500 bedrooms on that? And you guys have done a fantastic job with it. So you mentioned that intersection with student housing, was with the acquisition of Todd's company here in Charlotte. Go back a little bit. I know you said you started in Des Moines, but what was that origin story of BSB and how they came to be what they are today?
Well, it's a pretty unique origin story, really. A lot of architecture firms start as, a couple people get frustrated with their boss and they decide to go out and start their own thing. And some succeed, some don't, but In this case, Jack Bloodgood was the building editor for a trade publication, which we know differently today, but Building Better Homes and Gardens was a trade publication then. And he was, as the building editor, he was traveling around the country looking at, trends in home design and so forth. And he found that the designs weren't really addressing people's preferences, like how people lived in them. So he decided that, everybody should live in a home designed by an architect, and started just like really looking at how do people live and adapting home design to that. And that was in 1966, and we're still taking that approach to, really evolving the design, looking at how people live, but also, looking at taking a performance-based design approach, because we know that ultimately it's a performing asset. It's not just going to be a pretty picture that we all photograph and feel proud about. It's going to be a performing asset for the investors, and try and balance that with the artistic approach and how people live. So we find that start with that in mind from the beginning, and really are able to deliver on it as we balance all the competing interests for.
No, that's a perfect mindset to have to entree into student housing for sure, because there are so many just nuances, to the clientele and what they need. And then when you start thinking about the exit of the property, because, I've seen some stuff that was designed 30 years ago, that are now being purchased by the universities because they've either taken stuff all offline and, what they came back with, it was reduced in the numbers. So they begin looking at other things that are in the market of, hey, can we just pick this up and add that to our inventory? I think Dobie Center in Austin, Texas is probably a good example of that. And so I don't know that the folks that started, that built Dobie Center necessarily had that in mind, but it is one of those things when you're looking at student housing, you've got to think about all of the different possibilities for an exit strategy. And a lot of the things I've seen you guys doing recently, especially on some of that stuff that's more pedestrian to campus, certainly fits that. So, well, hey, let's go into the next question I wanted to ask you. So now that you guys have been doing it for several years, what's one of the biggest mistakes you see clients make?
I think a lot of clients don't understand the whole development process, or the design process, I should say. So they tend to want to just keep designing all the way through, sometimes until people are out there building it and they're still trying to redesign it. And the most successful projects that we see.
I do want to stop you there really quick and ask you about, because now that these virtual renderings are getting, better and better, do you feel like that's being reduced at all, that they're a little bit more comfortable with it, before things actually start going vertical? I don't know if you've seen that or not, but just kind of curious.
Visualization really helps the clients to picture it sooner. I think sometimes they, if you're just like showing them 2D drawings, they're not as trained as we are at visualizing things in their head. And so those tools help people to see what it can look like.
Yeah.
Of course, there's still a lot of things to vet out in the process of, working with GCs and getting cost input and so forth.
Yeah.
That's a great tool that can help firm up the decision-making earlier. Yeah. But to some extent, it's just different people have different approaches, and we try to bring it, as the trusted advisor, trying to bring more discipline to the process, having seen how it goes when it's more chaotic and things just keep changing, because there's different phases of design for a reason. There's, conceptual design, you're sort of conceiving what it may look like. It's still kind of fluid at that point, but that's kind of like, if you think about the construction drawings being like ultimately the building, and you're building the process up to a set of construction drawings that they're going to go out there and build. You're trying to figure out what are they going to build and vet everything out ahead of time. And there's hundreds of decisions to be made and things to work out and collaborate between engineers and specialized people, low voltage people and others. And you need to give, the team time to work through all that stuff to get a really cohesive set of construction drawings. But so the conceptual design, it's more fluid, and that's when you should really be, well, I got another idea and I got another idea. like you got to be disciplined about, doing that early, and then, vetting that out a little bit more. Schematic design, you're, expanding what you're working through with the client. And, design development, you're developing the design a little bit further, getting a little bit more into, how's it going to get built with, wall sections and details, that getting more detailed cost input from the GCs and their subs and suppliers, and really vetting out, like, is this really what we want to move forward with? And then when you get into construction documents, you really ought to be just refining it and just have all the decisions made as much as possible, and then let the team finish their work.
Yeah.
But some people want to it's more fun to just keep having another idea. And that's sort of like everybody's imagination is still flowing. Like, well, what about this? What about this?
I mean, developers in a lot of ways, I think are creators as well. And I think
absolutely,
in my experience in working with them, they'll go to sleep one night and have a dream about something, and next morning they're sending out an email to the architect saying, "Hey, can we?" so that's
can, but as in student housing, everything, the students are going to be showing up with their parents helping them move in on late July, early August, whatever year you're delivering, and you better be ready.
Yeah.
Or you might lose your leases and everything, or whatever, but. So we're always trying to back up from that and figure out, like, really, we've done this many, many times, we're over 50 student housing projects now. So we've refined our process, and we try to bring that expertise to the team and help the owner understand when they need to do what, and, be disciplined about it. And of course, we're going to adapt to the owner, and it's not a rigid process. It's a disciplined approach that we're going to adapt to.
Yeah.
What they're trying to accomplish.
So you would say their biggest mistake is not spending time with the architect on the front end and thinking that they can just have this open line of communication through the entire project?
Well, we want to have communication the whole way through. I think it's the biggest mistake, I would say in one sentence maybe, is just not having confidence in the decisions that are made early on.
Gotcha.
And sticking with it. Just kind of, some of them is continually second guessing themselves all the way.
Do you think that comes from their understanding of operations, or do you think it stems from somewhere else? And where I'm coming from that is, like I said, I've worked with a lot of developers. So typically the one thing they are lacking is a knowledge of operations, especially if they're new to student housing, which makes sense. I mean, if you've been doing multifamily or hospitality and you jump into student, there's, it's a totally different, type of customer, and you start explaining operations and just the cycle that revolves around the academic calendar. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, we didn't think about that. Is it coming more from a place like that where they, maybe because they lack the operational experience for student housing that they're doing that? Or do you just kind of see that across, across all facets of multifamily development?
Well, I think, some developers are, more experienced than others, and some of them are more willing to adapt to seeing how things went on the previous projects, and learn from that and improve with feedback from everybody else, which, we try to do as well. That's how we've continued to evolve our processes, just getting that input from everybody. And operators, we love hearing from the operators and the marketing folks, like what's selling, what are people looking for, what amenities are getting used or what's not getting used. And because, I mean, we're not there. I hardly ever see the final. Once people are moved in, I never see it again.
Yeah. Until the next buyer calls you up and ask if, hey, can we put a pool on the
So it is, it's always, it's a real team effort, and you got to, we want to try to meet with everybody that has the best. I mean, it's a team of specialists, and, including the developer and all the, their consultants and the architect and our consultants and all the specialists that really know their thing. Because everything, it's impacted, student housing is impacted by so many different things, and we can't be experts in everything and stay on top of the latest thing. Yeah. So like low voltage, you got to have a guy that knows that, or a woman, somebody's, a specialist that is staying on top of all those trends while we're staying on top of the latest products of veneers or a building or whatever, and it's.
Well, and I think, and that's a perfect segue to the other thing I wanted to make sure, we talked about with the audience on something that, I've experienced with you guys and, which is your process for this, because you guys are very intentional in trying to get this stuff, taken care of, on the front end. I'll let you explain a little bit about the charrettes and what that looks like. But I can say from my standpoint, I've been involved with it where you've brought in the developer and the developers brought me in, from a standpoint of consulting from an operations standpoint. And that process just was so much easier. But you want to explain a little bit about that?
We try and bring as much discipline to the design process as we can. With the charrette process, we're going to do some preparation, get as much information teed up as we can, certainly get the program nailed down, whatever it takes to figure out, what does a winning outcome look like? Mm-hmm. What are you trying to achieve? And then we can all, if we spend a focused period of time, ideally, maybe 3-4 days, where we're meeting with the client for 2 or 3 hours in the morning, and then we let them go off and catch up on emails, because everybody's got they're not looking at emails while they're in there. We're focusing on getting this figured out together. And we're bringing in all the stakeholders. If you can get a marketing person, if you can get an operations person, get a builder, get people that all have their knowledge base, and you're getting everything as much as possible fleshed out early, instead of going back and forth with emails. And, 2 or 3 weeks later, you realize, well, all the work we did is now got to be redone because one other person had
somebody wasn't there,
some input that, you know. So you want to really, the most successful outcomes come from just really focusing on what are you trying to achieve up front.
Yeah.
And walking through what does it take to figure that out. And so we'll try and flesh out unit plans, flesh out building plans, flesh out, elevations, or work 3-dimensionally with SketchUp or something ideally.
Yeah.
And really help everybody visualize it. Of course, a site plan, hopefully, ideally you come to that meeting with some site planning done, so you have an idea what fits on the site, but ideally the civil engineer's in there too, to, and you're vetting out your stormwater drainage and everything at the same time, because I've seen that kind of thing shift things around.
Now, do you guys typically, when I've been involved with them, it's been, in your conference room, big conference room, and you may not have everybody there at the same time. You may have, a couple of folks floating, kind of in and out, day after day, depending on how you kind of sequence things out. But is it always something that happens, in the BSB office, or is it something that you guys may go out to, wherever the property is being built? What's typical with that?
I mean, as with everything, we're going to do what's best for the client to help them succeed. And, they may be wherever they are, wherever their office is, we might travel to them if it's easier for them to keep going on their day-to-day thing. So we come in with a team and, we're meeting, whether they've got a conference room or it's a hotel kind of conference room, and we'll bring in a plotter and to be able to plot stuff out and so forth. But yeah, I mean, it's very fluid, and we're gonna make it work. But yeah, to your point, not everybody's in there. You might just have the civil engineer, for 2 hours on Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday morning or whatever it is to try and get their input, but you're not tying them up for the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. You certainly don't. You don't have them in there when you're talking to the interior designer, right?
Right.
But
although you want to cross over on the outdoor amenities and, with the landscape architect and so forth. So
true. Well, yeah, I've been through that process. I've done it both ways. I've done it where it's more of the wild, wild west, and things are being. I remember when things used to be faxed back and forth. It's,
dating yourself
a little bit. I've gone through that process, and then I've gone through the process with you guys, I think on 2, maybe 3 projects. And I will tell you, the projects that I did with you guys, where you went through that charrette process, it was so much more easier throughout the rest of the construction timeline and through the delivery process. So
Certainly what we're trying to achieve.
It reduced headaches for me. I appreciate it because not only in those situations was I consulted on the front end, but I was also a consultant on the back end, working with the staff and the university and everybody else on getting folks moved in. And so it's a lot easier when you know what's happening, good in both of those situations. I think it was a good 2 years in advance, but, and let me ask you about that too. I mean, what are you guys seeing on, cause I remember the day when going back to those garden homes, that were being built, a mile from campus. You could literally start on those in October and deliver them by August. That's not the case with most of the construction that we're seeing these days. Outside of supply chain issues and things like that, it just, to get a deal done, you're talking minimum 18-month actual construction timeline. Are you seeing, the timeline for planning everything before things start getting cleared? Has that timeline increased as well in student housing?
I don't think the planning time frame is extended, although, maybe, rezonings take a little bit more time because, I don't know. It's just, I think the banks are requiring more due diligence, among other things.
Gotcha.
So it maybe takes a little longer on the front end to get something teed up, but that's different for every client and every project, right? But, the easy projects are already done, right? So, easy sites, I should say.
Let's talk about supply lines for just a moment. I mean, are you seeing that improve? I mean, folks on the operations side with ordering furniture and things like that, from that standpoint, things seem to be improving. But, from a construction standpoint, a new development standpoint, how's supply chain on that side of the business?
We're seeing, a lot of things have improved with the supply lines since COVID, things getting rebuilt and maybe onshoring some of the manufacturing. Things like switch gears, for some reason, still a long lead time, and it can be a year or so.
Wow. Okay.
And so, we're always, helping people to make sure they're thinking about getting that shop drawing done when you're out there trying to pour footings and you're ordering switch gear. But, but that's what you got to do is hopefully you've got a good general contractor that understands the current status of all those things. But, we're trying to make sure that, the switch gear shop drawing comes through and gets approved and gets ordered pretty early on. And there's, other things like that, but it's always fluctuating. So I hate to go into too much detail because it's going to be different 2 months from now than it is right now.
Yeah. And geographic location always plays into that too. Michigan versus Florida. Yeah. So let me ask you, Don, and I guess this is both personal, from your perspective as well as maybe, from BSB, the team, but what's been the biggest surprise in student housing for you guys?
Personally, coming into it, having lived in, student housing apartments during my undergrad and graduate school educations, I wasn't living with, I didn't ever see any of these Mamma Jamma Bill Bayless amenities at that point, So coming into it, just seeing like this resort style amenities was kind of a shock to me, but
the wave pool,
but great. Brilliant, brilliant to see that market. But then more recently, just seeing how resilient student housing has been coming through the pandemic, we were all wondering like, what's the future of it during COVID, and just the resilience of it, and seeing how and I think it's largely because students always want to have that experience if they can make it happen. And I ideally get, especially the tier 1 and tier 2 universities, getting that name brand degree is important to set themselves up well. In any case, just wanting to have that experience of getting away from your family and sort of developing your own identity and surrounded by your peers and just, the fun of that, but also just kind of finding yourself and growing in a new direction, I think is something you can't get living in your mother's basement.
You were talking about the Bill Bayless amenities, and Bill, I don't know if you're listening, but that's I guess that's something you could trademark now.
Appreciate you, Bill, the Godfather.
In a lot of ways, thinking about the wave pools, the lazy rivers, that was a trend that we saw certainly when early in my career, that was something that was happening because, you could still find something a mile away from campus a piece of land that you could find for a decent price, but you're going to have to give them a reason for the students to go out there. And so that's when a lot of that stuff got built. You're not seeing that anymore, just because everything is, moved back to being closer to campus as far as new development is concerned. And I don't want to say you don't always see it. I mean, there are some markets where I think where you continue to see that development that's happening, to a good mile from campus. There's some stuff at Clemson that, was delivered recently that, continues to be that way. But what other trends, because the other trends I'm kind of thinking about, over my career, is a lot of it's been on the tech side. It's one of those things where you see some micro changes happening kind of year over year, but now I kind of look over, my 25 plus year history and I'm like, wow, there were a lot of big changes that have happened in student housing since then. Where trend wise, what are some things that have surprised you? What are some things that, are coming that maybe we don't even, we're not even thinking about? Maybe there's some suggestions there you've got for developers to think about as far as, hey, here's something, that we see coming down the pipeline as far as being a trend in student housing.
We're seeing a little bit more of, you want to find a site as close to campus as you can if you're doing off campus. And in that market, we're seeing a little bit more of, like, after COVID, some of the commercial buildings are not doing as well. Mm-hmm. And so those are in some cases getting bought up and doing adaptive reuse of those. Ideally you find something with relatively small footprint, because you want, to have all your units have natural light and mm-hmm. ventilation ideally. But even a bigger footprint building, then, it's doable. It's just a little bit more involved. You end up, carving out the core of a big footprint and creating a courtyard in the middle to get that daylight into the interior. I think there's also a little bit more, the universities are partnering up with developers, doing public-private partnerships, P3, mm-hmm. certainly teaming up with people on doing some of that as well. So, the universities are finding that it's better for them to do it that way than to own. They found themselves during COVID owning all this real estate, mm-hmm. and it's better to share that risk with someone else and the rewards of it. So, a lot of I think the trend is to do like a 99-year lease.
Yeah.
So those things, but also I think just taking another look on a smaller scale, kind of going back to the amenities and making, working with operators, as and really dialing in, as I was alluding to earlier, what's getting used and mm-hmm. what's not getting used. And so we're getting that information fed into the feedback loop and looking at, I'm not seeing as many tanning beds anymore, and seeing more work from home study spaces and of different sizes, and just trying to dial that in with getting feedback from how is it getting used by the students for real. Because we imagine what we would do, but then there's the reality of what gets done.
Yeah, the good old tanning beds. Those, between just being generally unhealthy, which, college kids do a lot of unhealthy things. I get it. The energy that it took, and
the HVAC.
Oh, the mechanical that had to be redone. I will never forget the first time, I had a property that had a tanning bed. It was an afterthought. It was an add-on. It's like, oh, well, everybody else is doing it. Let's add this in. So it was kind of put in a corner. It was one of those stand-up units you put in the corner. Well, you thought you'd put it in the corner, but put it in the corner of the fitness center or something, right? And then, if the fitness center wasn't hot already from people working out and sweating, then you add 100 UV bulbs
right.
And that was really bad thinking. And then it ultimately led, I think, a year later to the entire fitness center being completely gutted and redone so that we could have these tanning beds actually built in. But tanning beds, tell me from a tech kind of low voltage standpoint, or are people still wiring Cat 5 these days, or is everything going wireless?
A lot of things are just, how many things can you have controlled by an app, right?
Yeah.
And it's more about getting it, connected from a network standpoint, but, which certainly involves some wiring, some hard wiring ahead of time, ideally. But, that's where we got to bring in the experts and stay on top of those trends and pick their brains.
So for the most part, are they still saying, hey, we got to get Cat 5 in every room? And I'm sure it's Cat 6E or whatever it is now, but.
Well, yeah, and you want to have the greatest bandwidth for gaming and so forth. Students really want to have super fast internet. So I think that's still achieved best through fiber optics and wire, and not through the air. But
yeah. Well, Don, before we wrap up here, I want to go back to some of the things that maybe I missed it, in your opening, but in my short time of observing BSB since Todd sold the company and everything else, there's been a lot of evolution that's happened with what you guys are providing. And, certainly the one that's, stands out to me the most is interior design services. But what other services do you guys provide?
Yeah, so we've got a community design group as well, and a structural engineering group. Architects in a commercial division as well. So like when we get into mixed use, we've got people we can tap, but they do standalone commercial work as well.
Now you said community design. I don't know that I'm guessing what I think that means, but can you explain that?
Yeah. So I think traditionally people would say land planning, but they like to say community design because it's not just, they're trying to distinguish. It's not just sort of an engineering approach to looking at it. It's and what will fit, but it's thinking about integrating the the buildings with the landscaping and the entryways and what's the sequence of moving through. It's what's the experience going to be like, and how is that going to flow, which is a little bit more artistic and design oriented than love our civil engineering buddies. But
yeah, I mean, and we're seeing more and more of a trend towards BTR, and I got to imagine that's a huge part. That's
a lot of what, this group has been doing that. Actually, we're one of the first firms to do BTR, starting back out in the Phoenix office as it grew. So the clients we're taking on now have the benefit of, learning from the early adopters' mistakes and, just lessons learned, let's say. That we're integrating from the start, having learned that.
So you said community design services, structural engineering.
Yeah, and you mentioned interiors, right?
Yeah, interior design. So
and our commercial group, is good too. We are mostly focused on housing, but one thing we're getting a little more into lately too is self-storage, which tends to follow multifamily around.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you, you kind of touched on a little bit about conversions earlier, and, here in Charlotte, this has become a thing. You and I have talked about this in the past is, office building conversions into housing. And, recently here in Charlotte, that's become, a thing that has ended up in front of the city council or whatever, possible adaptive use, because they've said, I think they said 30%, somewhere between 25 and 30% of the office space is just completely empty. And those companies or those employees are never coming back. And so they've talked about reusing that space, from everything from childcare to low income housing. I think there's a property I visited a couple of years ago in Tampa that is actually servicing the University of Tampa, because you're right there in that downtown, corridor. And, the student housing at University of Tampa, I may be giving away some secrets that a few developers would probably prefer or not, but they've had some tremendous growth. And I toured that building. It wasn't the best feeling, but it worked. And, now I think it's becoming a little bit more and more of a trend. I know Core Spaces have got a, beautiful property that they did. Gosh, they probably did 10 years ago now in Columbia, USC. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was a AT&T building or something like that. But what are your thoughts? You think that's something, we're in a couple of these campuses or in some urban areas? I'm thinking of like Cincinnati and, NC State, obviously. You've got a lot of commercial office space around that, Raleigh. Do you think that's a good idea, or you think those developers may come back and regret that decision?
Well, I think it's the kind of thing, you vet out each property individually to figure that out.
Sure.
And, that's where I'll come back to our performance-based design approach, is like you get the right people to evaluate it up front and figure out, like, you certainly want a GC involved to figure out what are the costs of doing what it would take to get that particular building to be marketable for that use.
Yeah.
I think, it's a great sustainability play. And if there's a lot of built stock out there that you can probably turn around more quickly if you're not doing, like, taking out the center core, for example, is pretty extreme, but doable, but it's going to take a little longer. But I think if you get the right building with the right footprint, you could probably get up and running a lot quicker with something like that than, starting with foundations. And,
Yeah.
But I think it's the kind of thing where, as I said, just kind of go back and involve all the people that up front and evaluate it, so you don't get out over your skis on taking risk. We want to manage the risk by figuring it out before you get too far down the.
What's kind of your recommendation if you guys were asked to do something like that, and you were approached by a developer, said, "Hey, maybe I'm buying out 10 floors in this high rise, or we're buying this entire building and converting it." Is it bringing in the folks from your, the work on the commercial side to assist with that, or do you just hand it over to the residential from the beginning? Just kind of thinking what that process looks like.
So, I would approach it like just, a lot of other projects, just like go back to like, what's the winning outcome look like, and bring together the right people to evaluate that. Could even use the charrette approach at a certain point, but I think you really want to vet out the project as best you can before you want to manage the risk by not getting too far down the road on it. Figure out like the viability of each individual project, getting all the right people in a room and figuring that out. But, I think that's where, we could pull in our, multifamily designers and our commercial guys. Maybe a mixed use approach might work best for a certain property. So it's not all getting converted to housing. It's maybe in a location where there's a demand for retail or a little bit of office or work from home stuff. Maybe a shared fitness center where people from the community can have a membership, and it helps to fund that amenity for the multifamily. But I think that's one advantage we have, like having, multiple people in house, is we can really tap the best resources from around the country. And, just like everything else we do, kind of like figure out what the winning outcome looks like, figure out what are the steps it takes to get there, execute that with precision and speed, and really help the client succeed the best we can.
Based on what you said right there, I just thought about how great it would be to do. One of the things, previous company I worked for, one of the things that we kind of had as an idea was building on this. With college students, there's always so much innovation there. We talked about Adobe Center earlier, and down in Austin, Texas. I don't know if you know this or not, but that's actually where Michael Dell started Dell Computers. Was in the 23rd or 27th floor of that building. And
not a garage.
Well,
seems like everything starts in a garage.
So the parking garage was actually
a garage
next door, and there's been I'm trying to think of the performer's name, but anyway, he actually shot one of his music videos back when music videos used to be a thing. In that same garage. So there's a lot of history there with Adobe. But anyway, no, we talked a lot about, there's so much innovation there with students, and being able to kind of harness that a little bit and make it part of the community, and doing an incubator program. I don't want to say we didn't get off the ground. There were 2 companies that we ended up funding through it, and it was a lot of fun. But that's really something, when you start looking at these conversions of office buildings, putting something aside like that to do an incubator that, is working with the university, and a lot of great ideas there. So, right.
There's such a research, there's an overlap between university research and corporate research.
And those university research
government research.
Yeah. They do not like private companies coming in and talking about doing incubators, but
well, they could be one of the stakeholders in it.
If they were smart about it, they would be. So, well, Don, thanks so much again for coming down to Rock Hill and coming into the studio for a little bit to discuss. I appreciate it. Appreciate the sponsorship this past year of the podcast. That's been fantastic, and love what you guys are doing. If anybody wants to get a hold of you, we'll put the email address and everything in the show notes. The website's bsbdesign.com.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
And any conferences you're going to be at this year?
Well, planning to be in Austin at Interface,
Yeah.
at least, and we'll figure out the rest from there.
Oh, great.
But yeah, we really appreciate the opportunity to come in, Wes, and the partnership. We're always looking to build more win-win opportunities like this.
Well, fantastic. Well, I appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Wes.
Thanks. Again, a big thanks to Don for taking the time to come into the studio for that discussion. It's always fantastic when I get to meet with someone face to face for a podcast recording as opposed to over a computer screen. But also, I want to thank BSB support of Student Housing Insight over the years as well. They've been a part of several events that we've done in the past. They've sponsored podcasts in the past, and they've just been a lot of fun to work with. So if you have a need for BSB services, or you would just like to network in case something comes up down the road, we'll provide Don's info in the show notes. Don will also be attending the Interface Conference in Austin at the end of April. So if you're going to be there for Interface's Student Housing Conference and you want a few minutes to meet with him, please reach out to him. Again, we'll put his email and contact information in the show notes. Well, folks, that's it for this episode. Please share this podcast with your colleagues if you got any value out of it. I appreciate you listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a great day.